Hello there.
You have some bloody nerve. Why haven't you called? Where the hell have you been all this time?
Ah, does that mean that you missed me?
Anyway, Jay, if you're looking for him, he's not here. But he left you an assignment.
It breaks my heart that you will never admit that you missed me. What's the assignment?
The release of 007 First Light is near, and Imaginative Visions is going back into the archives. We want a retrospective on Bond games from the past, starting with Daniel Craig's first Bond game, Quantum of Solace. Bye.
Well, you heard the lady, so let's talk about Quantum of Solace. When people talk about James Bond games, the conversation usually begins and ends with GoldenEye 007. Maybe someone brings up Nightfire, Every Day or Nothing, or From Russia with Love, but one Bond game that often gets left behind is 007 Quantum of Solace. This was Activision's first major shot at the franchise and Daniel Craig's first appearance as a playable Bond. This was released in 2008, and Quantum of Solace arrived during a major shift for 007. The movies had moved away from the gadget heavy fantasies of the Pierce Brosnan era and into the more bruised knuckle realism of Daniel Craig. Bond was colder, rougher, and more human. The game tried to follow that same direction by adapting moments from both Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, giving players a combined version of Craig's early Bond arc. But what makes this worth revisiting is not just the license, it's the fact that the PlayStation 2, 3, and the Nintendo DS versions are not simply the same game with different graphics. Each version feels like its own interpretation of what a Daniel Craig Bond game should be. One chases the modern shooter trend, one experiments with handheld controls, and one surprisingly may be the best version of them all. Before Quantum of Solace, Bond games were closely tied to Electronic Arts. EA had delivered several memorable titles, including Agent Under Fire, Nightfire, Everything or Nothing, and From Russia with Love. When Activision took over the license, expectations were high. This was not just a publisher handling Bond, this was a new Bond identity. Daniel Craig's version of the character was a major departure. He was not the smooth, untouchable spy who has always had the perfect gadget ready. He was physical, impatient, vulnerable, and dangerous. His Bond got hurt. He made mistakes. He fought like a man trying to survive, not like a superhero in a tuxedo. That shift gave the developers a clear challenge. How do we make a Bond game that feels like the Craig movies? Do you build a traditional spy adventure with gadgets and stealth? Do you make a cinematic action game? Or do you follow the most popular trend of the era and turn Bond into a modern shooter protagonist? The answer depended on which version you played. One of the strongest parts of Quantum of Solace is the inclusion of Daniel Craig himself. His likeness and voice gave the game immediate legitimacy. This was not just a generic replacement Bond or a loose interpretation. This was the movie's Bond of the moment stepping directly into the interactive space. Craig's presence mattered because his Bond is so physical. His version of 007 is built on movement, impact, and of course intensity. You believe him when he throws a punch. You believe when he throws someone through a wall or he takes cover during a chaotic firefight. The game understands that side of him, although some versions understand it better than others. The story also benefits from pulling from both Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace instead of only adapting the second Craig film. The game reaches back to Bond's first mission as Double O that gives the campaign more recognizable moments, including confrontation tied to Le Chiffre, Vesper, and the emotional fallout that shapes Craig's Bond moving forward. It's not a deep retelling, and the pacing can feel rushed, but it does make the game feel like a bridge between the two films rather than a simple one movie cash in. We're going to kick off with the PlayStation 3 version, and this is where Bond meets the modern shooter. The PlayStation 3 version is one most people played and probably expected in 2008. It's slicker, louder, and clearly was built for HD console generation. This was developed by Treyarch and it uses technology associated with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and you can feel the COD influence and it wears it on its sleeve immediately. And this version plays mostly as a first person shooter. Bond moves through the linear levels, takes on groups of enemies, aims down sights, and pushes from one combat zone to the next. When he enters cover, the camera pulls back into third person, allowing you to see him press against walls, ducking behind objects, and popping out to return fire. The cover system is the PlayStation 3's version most Bond like feature. It gives the action a little bit more style than standard first person shooter. You can feel the developers trying to blend Craig's cinematic physicality with the popular mechanics at the time. The shooting itself is solid, weapons feel responsive, movement was quick, and the campaign moves at a steady pace. But the problem, of course, with a lot of Activision's Bond games was its identity. Too often, the PlayStation 3 version feels like it's a less of a Bond game and more of a Call of Duty military shooter game with Bond characters inserted in it. This is not entirely a bad thing. In 2008, that style was extremely popular. I mean, FPSs were king genre in the video game market. Players wanted fast shooting, online multiplayer, and cinematic action, and the PlayStation 3 version delivered those things. It is the most technically impressive version of the game, and for players who wanted Bond to feel modern, this was probably the most obvious pick for you. But Bond is not just about firing from behind cover, he's about atmosphere, style, of course, espionage, danger, and personality. The PlayStation 3 version has the polish, but it does not have the flavor. But that being said, I will say that the PlayStation 3 version of Quantum of Solace graphics were bigger, sharper, and visually the PS3 version is the strongest of the three. The environments have more detail, the character models are cleaner, and the film inspired locations benefit from the stronger hardware. And Daniel Craig's likeness is easier to recognize, and the presentation has the cinematic sheen expected from an HD console game. The action also had more impact because of the lighting effects, sharper animation, explosions, firefights, and cutscenes look more expensive than the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo DS versions. However, better graphics do not automatically create a better Bond experience. The PS3 version can look polished while still feeling very generic. Some areas blur together, enemy encounters can be very repetitive, and the game often looks like a competent late 2000s shooter rather than a memorable 007 adventure. It wins the graphic battle easily, but when it comes to the personality, the PS3 version is not the automatic winner for this. Let's talk about the Nintendo DS version, which is the experimental one. The DS version is completely different. Rather than attempting to shrink the console shooter directly onto a handheld, Vicarious Visions created a isometric action game built around touch controls. From a design standpoint, that was a smart move. The DS was not built to deliver a PS3 style Bond shooter, it needed its own identity. And the isometric camera gives the game a more tactical look while the touchscreen is used for movement, aiming, and shooting. During close combat, the camera shifts in closer to Bond, giving the melee encounters a more direct feel. The DS version also includes one of the most interesting ideas of any version of the game, a casino themed upgrade system. Players can use chips and cards to improve Bond's abilities, with poker hand style combinations affecting upgrades. That is exactly the kind of mechanic that you will feel that is appropriate for a James Bond game. It connects gameplay to the world of casinos, risk, and spy fantasy. Unfortunately, though, the DS version is more interested in concept rather than execution. Touchscreen shooting can feel awkward, especially during busier combat moments. The isometric camera does not always give the best view of the action, and the hardware limitations keeps the experience from feeling like a cinematic as the console versions. Still, this version does deserve a credit or, a nice attempt. It does not simply copy the main game. It tries to turn Quantum of Solace into something that fits the DS. And that ambition makes it worth mentioning and a little bit worth remembering about and giving it a little bit glimpse of. The DS version has obviously have visual limitations, as you can see here. Characters are small, environments are simplified, and the action is less cinematic. Compared to the PS3, it looks like a completely different generation of Bond games because it was. Still, for the hardware, it does its job. The environments are readable, camera gives the game its own style, and the small scale works for a handheld mission structure. It cannot compete visually with obviously a PlayStation 2 or a PlayStation 3 or a Wii, but it never was trying to. The DS version's real value is in its uniqueness. It's not the best looking game, but I would have to say it is a nice attempt to bring Bond to the handheld. Now let's talk about truly the best version of the Quantum of Solace games, the PlayStation 2 version. This version is where the conversation gets really interesting because on paper, it should have been the lesser version. It was released on the agent hardware, lacked the visual polish of a PS3, and did not have the same modern feature set. But Eurocom made one decision that changed everything. The PlayStation 2 version is a full blown third person cover shooter. That changes and makes a huge difference. Instead of only seeing Bond during cover moments, you see him throughout the entire game. You watch him move, aim, take cover, and fight. That perspective makes the experience feel more connected to the Daniel Craig's Bond. Craig's 007 is physical, as we've been saying. His personality comes through in how he carries himself, how he reacts under pressure, how he survives brutal encounters. At first person view can make him feel like any other shooter hero. A third person view reminds you that you are playing as Bond. The PS2 version may not have the same technical muscle, but it is better understanding the fantasy of controlling Craig's Bond. Every shootout feels more personal because Bond is visible. The cover system feels central rather than secondary, and the action feels more like a spy thriller scene and less like a standard FPS level. This is why the PS2 version feels like the best adaptation for Quantum of Solace. The biggest strength of the PS2 version was its perspective. Bond games work best when the player feels like they are inhabiting the character, not just firing weapons in theme environments. The PS2 version gives Bond presence. You see him press against the cover, you see him step out to fire, you see his movements through space. Even with weaker animation and less visual detail, the constant view of the character gives the game a stronger identity. There's also something more deliberate about the PS2's version pacing. The PS3 version often feels like it's chasing the energy of the biggest shooters of all time. The PS2 version feels more focused on letting Bond move through compact action scenes. It's smaller, but that smaller scale works in its favor. The levels are not perfect, and some content is missing compared to the HD version, but the structure feels cleaner. In this version, Bond is able to sneak around more. He's doing stealth. It's a balance of stealth and action, what you're used to seeing in Bond games. It does not feel like a lesser game trying to be the PS3. It feels like it's its own Bond game built around the strengths and limits of the PS2. And not to mention graphically, it's still gorgeous. For the PS2, it uses the strengths of it. Daniel Craig looks excellent on the PS2. The environments look good for the PS2. The character models might be simpler, the environments might be less detailed, but it still captures that raw feel of the Daniel Craig era. While the graphics are not a powerhouse, they are also about clarity and direction. The PS2 version is easy to read. Cover points are clearer. Enemy points are, not points, but positions are more understandable. His movements are more visible. And as a late PS2 game release, it's surprisingly respectable. It does not try to compete with directly with the PS3 version. It is its own thing. And why is this the best one? Like I said, it feels more like a Bond game. The PS3 version has better graphics. The DS had better creative ideas with the handheld. But the PS2 version has the clearest understanding of Daniel Craig's 007. It takes the physical nature of Craig's Bond and builds the game around seeing him in action. That is what matters in a Bond game. A Bond game should not feel interchangeable with every other shooter from its era. The PS3 version is fun, but sometimes gets swallowed by the trends of 2008. The DS version is creative, but it's limited in what it's able to do. The PS2 version is rougher, but it has a stronger personality. It feels like a lost bridge between classic third person Bond games and the Craig's era grounded action style. It does not have the gadgets and heavy charm of a Nightfire or the cinematic variety of everything or nothing, but it has a direction that works. It knows this Bond is not about lasers, watches, and invisible cars. This Bond is about survival, instinct, and impact. And not to mention the most important thing, which I failed to mention, this game, the PS2 version, captures the moments and the film way better than the PS3 and DS because it expands. You get to explore a little bit more levels of Quantum. It does Casino Royale really good, and that third person actually works. And not to mention, the music is great. You have I think her name is Carrie. She does When Nobody Loves You theme song was excellent in this. Quantum of Solace for the PS2 is not a masterpiece, but I would say it's damn well worthy of being in the Bond franchise of games there. I will put it up there with Agent of Fire. And it's something that I would say it's fascinating when we look back at it. It represents a franchise caught between eras. The films had changed, the license had changed, the shooter market had changed. Activision as developers were trying to figure out where Bond fit in a gaming world dominated by modern military action and shooters, but the results were uneven and kind of forgettable. The PS3 version gave players a polished HD shooter. The DS gave us a handheld experiment, but the PS2 version gave us Bond. And that, I'm going to say that again. The PS2 version gave us Bond. It may not look the best, it may not have the most features, but damn it, it is a solid Bond game. And it's a very underrated one. It should be in a conversation with Agent Under Fire and at least Nightfire of Bond games. When we talk about PS2 Bond games, Quantum of Solace needs to get a mention in that. With that being said, friends, this is Justin for more license to replay is coming soon, my friends. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe. I'm waiting for my next mission to talk about the next Bond game as we head towards First Light. And I will have a review once the game comes out. I will be playing it. So my review will probably be a week later after that. But I will be getting First Light when it comes out because I'm a huge Bond fan. And I might be doing some retrospectives on the Daniel Craig era movies as well. Maybe we'll see. Anyway, if you like what we do here, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, my friends, and I will catch you on the next review. Later days.